Hi, my name is Ryan O'Connell and welcome to this quick training video on attaching a data disk to a VM. Why would you want to attach a data disk for a VM, and what is a data disk? So let's go through some basic fundamentals. Attach a data disk to a VM. All you need to do this lab is an active Azure subscription. If you don't have one, get one, it's free. In order to attach disks, users in the administration portal, you must have signed in as a global admin, virtual machine contributor, or user access administrator. So all virtual machines have at least two disks, an operating system disk and a temporary disk. The operating system disk is created from the image, and both the operating system disk and the image are actually virtual hard disks, or VHDs, stored in the Azure storage account. The OS disk. Every virtual machine has one attached operating system disk. The OS disk has a pre-installed OS, which is selected when the VM is created. This disk contains the boot volume, and the disk has a maximum capacity of 4095 gigabits, and this is different from GBs. Temporary disk provides short-term storage for applications and processes and is intended only to install such data as page or swap files. The data on the temporary disk may be lost during a maintenance event or when you redeploy a VM, so you do not want to save critical data to that temporary disk. You stand a big chance of losing that data, so whatever you do, do not save data to the temporary disk. On Azure Linux VMs, the temporary disk is typically the /dev/sdb, and on Windows VMs, the temporary disk is D by default. The temporary disk is not encrypted by the server-side encryption unless you enable encryption on the host. Data disk. A data disk is a managed disk that is attached to a virtual machine to store applications, data, and other data that you need to keep. Data disks are registered as SCSI drives and are labeled with a drive letter that you can choose from. Each data disk has a maximum capacity of 32.76 gigabytes or 32 terabytes. So you can really put some big disks in there and really have a lot of information and a lot of data stored on those drives. The size of the virtual machine depends on how many data disks you can attach to it and the type of storage you can use to host the data disk. So keep that in mind. Azure supports up to 32 terabytes for managed data disks. Managed disks support three key default roles. Owner, you can manage everything including access. Contributor, you can manage everything except access. And reader, you can view anything, but you cannot make changes, which obviously makes sense if you can read it, but you can't make any changes. Some gotchas. Can I shrink or downsize my managed disk? No, this feature is not currently supported in Azure. Can I rename a managed or unmanaged disk after it's been created? For managed disks, you cannot rename them. However, you may rename a managed disk as long as it's not currently attached to a VM or VHD. Can I use a standard SSD as an unmanaged disk? No, standard SSD disks are only available as managed disks. Bear that in mind. Why would we want to use data disks? Well, we want to protect our data. If the data is in a separate location, for example, if C fails, then the data is on a separate disk. It's easier to manage and share that disk and allow people to access resources. Again, it allows up to 32 terabytes of large volumes. In the real world, most servers, both in the cloud on-prem, will have two or more disks attached to it. Attached storage drives will always have data on it due to its flexibility in size and management. I mean, in the real world, you may have your server that's attached to a SAN. That SAN will represent a data disk. It could be broken up into partitions or chunks, or it could be one solid drive. That just depends on the way your infrastructure is set up. Depends on what type of hardware you have, and it depends on the type of things you are doing in your industry. Some companies may have NAS devices as well, and you can log in with a web interface. So it all just depends. But the whole idea with this lab is to learn what is a data disk, why do we attach data disks and what is the importance of having data disks in place. So again, in our lab setup, we're going to have our standard VM server. Obviously, it does have the OS disk and the temporary disk, but then we're going to go ahead and we're going to attach a data disk, as you can see in the picture here. Then our server will have 3 drives, but again, our data disk, we will mark it and call it data so that we don't get confused and we can actually save data to that disk. In our lab layout, we're going to create a VM, we're going to create and import the disk, and we're going to add that disk into our virtual machine. We're going to then log on and see if it all works. I encourage you guys to go and look at the Microsoft link below. It'll give you more information about virtual machines, managed disks, and give you a great overview. Again, this lab is just designed to get you up and running quickly with learning how to attach a data disk. And of course, we're going to do this lab from the ground up. We'll create the VM from the ground up, and we'll go in, log into that VM. We'll see if the disk is there. We will then come out of the VM, shut it down, attach that disk, log back in, and see if our data disk shows up. So there's a few things that we're going to do to get this up and running. So let's move over to the portal and let's fire up this puppy. Hi, as you can see, I've gone ahead and logged into the portal. So in this lab, we want to create a data disk, or we want to add a data disk to an existing virtual machine. So I thought we could do this lab from the ground up. That way you will have a better understanding of how to add a data disk and what a data disk is. So let's start from scratch. The first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to actually create a resource group. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to resource groups here in the menu. I'm going to click create, and when this opens up, I'm going to paste in the name which I have typed out in Notepad, and I'm just going to call this Data Disk Lab 01. I'm going to say review and create, and click create. This is going to go ahead and create that resource group for us. The reason we create a resource group is so that we can throw all of our resources in one location. So when it comes to cleaning up resources or deleting resources, we're not running all over the show to try and find out where those resources live. So as you can see, I've got my Data Disk Lab resource group here. So the next thing we want to do is navigate to virtual machines. I'm going to click virtual machines here, or you could type in the top VIR and select virtual machines from here. Either way, it'll take you to the same place. I'm going to create a new virtual machine by clicking create and selecting virtual machine. And we're going to go ahead and create a virtual machine. I'm going to go ahead and from the drop down menu, I'm going to select that Data Lab Disk 01. I'm going to give my virtual machine a name. I have this typed out in Notepad. I'm going to just accept the defaults for now. I'm just going to give it a username. I'll just say AAZ admin. And then of course, I'm going to go ahead and type in a password. And type that password again. And then go ahead and click next. For the disk, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to use standard SSD. This is great for dev and testing. Again, that's all we're doing is we're learning, so we're not too worried about the disk IOPS or the disk performance. I'm going to go next on the networking tab. I'm going to accept the defaults for now. I'm going to make sure RDP is open. This is telling me that it's open, so don't be too concerned about this because again, this is just a training lab. I'm going to go next for management. I'm going to disable boot diagnostics. We don't need that on. And I'm going to go ahead and go next. And we're not going to worry about tagging. And I'm going to click next. This is going to go away and validate our virtual machine settings. And once our validation is successful, we'll get this little green icon here saying validation is passed. Now we can create our virtual machine by clicking the create button. And this will go away and create that virtual machine. And it shouldn't take too long to create, or should we say deploy. So if you ever hear the term, someone says, oh, you need to create a virtual machine, just think about someone wants you to deploy a virtual machine. So I'm going to navigate to this little bell icon here, and this gives us our notifications and our progress of what's going on. So I'm just going to close this down, and we're just going to wait for a couple of seconds, or in my case, won't be too long. Could be a minute or two, maybe even less, for the virtual machine to go away, deploy, and create all those resources. The reason it takes time to deploy is because we're getting an IP, it's creating a network security group, as well as creating the VNet or virtual network. So once our virtual machine has been created, we will then log into it and we'll actually go and have a look and make sure we don't have a data disk, and then we'll go and add that data disk. So we'll just wait again for a couple of seconds, or when I mean a couple of seconds, about a minute or so, and this virtual machine should create. It's pretty quick, so let's just wait for it to finish deploying. It shouldn't take too long. And as you can see, that didn't take long at all. So I'm just going to go to my notification icon. We can see everything has successfully deployed. I'm going to dismiss all of that, and I'm going to navigate back to virtual machines, and I'm going to see my server here. So I'm going to click on my server, and as you can see, it gives me a whole lot of information about our server. And as you can see, we only have one disk, and I'm going to go ahead and RDP to that server by clicking the connect button here, selecting RDP, and of course downloading that RDP client. I'm going to open up this file, and we should be able to connect. Sorry, do that again. I'm just going to download the RDP file. I'm going to click open, and it's opened up on another section of my machine. I'll just drag this over so that you can see it. I'll click connect. It's opening up on another window. I'm going to type in my username, type in my password, and I'm going to click OK. And this is going to give me a validation. Do we want to connect to data server 01? Yes, we do. Let's click yes. And this is going to go away and create that remote session. It's just opened up on my other window because I've got dual screen. So I'm just going to drag this over so that you can actually see this happening as we speak. And as you can see, we just give it a minute or two for it to fire up and allow us to log in. And then we'll go and have a look at our data disks. So again, it doesn't take that long to connect. As you can see, it's very, very quick. And this is our Windows 2016 server. And we'll just wait for Server Manager to finish doing its thing, and we'll go ahead and then we will close some windows down so that we don't need to have Server Manager. So I'm going to go ahead and check this box here. I'm going to click close. I'm just going to slide over to the end here, and of course I'm just going to close this bad boy down. I'm going to scroll down again. I'm going to move over, and I'm going to select File Explorer, and this is going to open up File Explorer. I'm going to drag that to the center so that we can see this, and I'm going to go here, and as you can see, when I click on this PC or this computer icon, we have our Windows disk and we have some temporary storage, but we don't have a data disk, so we might need to add a data disk. And data disks are used to add different apps or programs. As you know, in the real world environment, a server wouldn't just have one drive. It would have two drives, a drive for the OS and another drive to install all the data. So now that we can see there is no data disk here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to close this bad boy down by clicking here and clicking OK. And I'm going to navigate back to my virtual machine. I'm going to select on my virtual machine, and I'm going to stop that virtual machine. I'm going to click yes to stop that virtual machine. That virtual machine shouldn't take too long to stop. Once it's stopped, we can go ahead and create our brand new data disk. So let's just wait. This will take a couple of seconds to shut down. When it shuts down, it'll say it's deallocated. At the moment, it's in a deallocation state. That doesn't mean it's shut down. We've got to wait for the virtual machine to stop running. We'll get a notification here saying that the virtual machine has stopped. And of course, we'll get a notification here saying it's in a deallocated mode. Now, bear in mind, if you don't stop your virtual machine and it's not in a deallocated mode, while that virtual machine is running, you are paying for it. And the same with your data disk. It's an extra charge. So you just need to be aware of that. And as you can see, it's now saying it's in a deallocated mode. And of course, you can always hit the refresh button just to confirm that it is in a deallocated mode, which it is. So we're going to scroll down to disks, and we're going to select create and attach a new disk. If we had existing disks, we could do that as well. So I'm going to click create and attach a disk. I'm just going to give this disk a name. I'll just say data. And of course, we can choose what type of disk we want by selecting the storage type. And we can come down and choose what we want. I'm going to select the dev test, and of course we can choose the gig size, like 4 gig or 1 terabyte, whatever will suit your needs. I'm going to go ahead and click save, but let me give you some more real estate so that you can see what's going on. And of course, if we scroll over, you can see we've got encryption managed key here. Of course, we could go ahead and do host caching. There's a lot of things we can do here. But for our lab, we just want to create the data disk. So we've entered our data disk name, and of course, we've entered our storage type, and we've given our disk a size. So I'm going to go ahead and click save, and this is going to go away and save that disk and create it for us. Once that's done, we'll RDP back into our server, and we should see our data disk there, but we still have to do some configuration. So we'll just wait for this quickly to run. It shouldn't take too long. And as you can see, it's gone ahead and it's completed successfully, and we can see that from here. So what we want to do now is we want to do a refresh, and we can see now we have our disk name data over here. It's 4 gig in size. So I'm just going to close this bad boy down, navigate back to my virtual machine, and let's fire this puppy up. Once this virtual machine has started, we will then RDP into that VM. So we'll give it a 10-15 seconds to fire up, and then we can actually remote in and carry on with the lab. And as you can see, our virtual machine has started successfully. I'm just going to close this down, and I'm just going to connect to that VM. I'm just going to drag this over because it's opening it up on a second window. I'm going to click connect, and of course, because we connected before, it's remembered our username. I'm just going to type in my password and press enter, and we're going to get a certificate warning. I'm going to say yes, and this is going to go ahead and allow that RDP session to that server. So I'm just going to bring it over because as you can see, it's opened up on another window. And we'll just wait a couple of seconds for this to fire up. As you can see, it's already done it. But we still need to go and initialize our disk. Now, let me just show you something before we get into this lab of initializing the disk so that we can actually start using that data disk. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down. And if I go to our File Explorer and open this up, and I go to this PC, as you can see, we've got no disk. But you're saying, hey, Ryan, but I've just added that disk there in Azure. Where is my disk? Well, we still have to go and tell the server about that disk or Windows 10 about that disk. So click on the search button here, type in COM for computer, and we want to actually go to computer management. This is the easiest way to get there. So let's type in computer management, click on the computer management icon. This will fire up Computer Manager, and we can now go into our disk management settings over here. And this should now go ahead and tell us we have a disk. And as you can see, it's picked up that disk. We don't want to make this a bootable disk. We just want to make this a GPT partition. In other words, if we create a GPT partition, we can use all of the disk. So I'm going to select that for now, and I'm going to click OK. And that initializes the disk. And as you can see, there's our little 4 gig disk, but it's still not ready for use. So right mouse click on that, say New Simple Volume, go Next, click Next, and of course, let's give it a name. Let's call this data. That's fine. Let's go Next, Finish, and this will go ahead and format that drive for us. Once that drive is formatted, as you can see, it signed us drive letter E. I'm going to go ahead and close this down, and there's our data disk. And we can go now and create files and create folders to suit, and we can go ahead and create shares and use that data disk as you would use a regular disk. So that's how you create a data disk in Azure. It's not that hard, so I hope you guys have had fun learning this lab. There's still a bit more to do, so I'm going to go ahead and close this virtual machine down, and I'm going to click OK. Now, if you decided that you don't no longer need these resources because this is training, I'm going to show you how to clean up your resources at the end of the day. Of course, if we select on our disks, we can see we've got our data disk here, and of course we can go through and get a whole lot of information about the disk size and the performance. We can upgrade that disk. So there's a lot of things we can do. We can export that disk if you wanted to use it somewhere else. So in our case, we've completed this lab successfully, so we want to go and clean up behind us, and that's another pretty easy thing to do. So all we want to do is navigate back to our resource group. We want to select our data lab disk here, click on this to open it up, and of course we can highlight it here, click copy, and of course we could say delete resource, and that would delete that resource. When we click delete resources, once we've pasted the name in there, this button becomes valid and we can click delete. But just before we do that, again, let's go to our data disk over here, and it takes you to the same place where you can do a whole lot of things as well. If you go into the properties of our data disk, we can see a whole lot of information about our data disk. So let's go back into here and let's go ahead and clean up our resources. Again, if you're not too sure where you're going, you can always go back to your resource group, select the data lab resource group. In my case, I can highlight it over here, click copy, click delete, paste this name in and click delete, and this will go now and delete that resource group for us. It takes a second or two and it'll kick in, and as you can see, it's telling us that it's deleting our resource group. So once our resource group has been deleted, we can then go ahead and do a refresh to make sure that it's gone. That way we're not paying for stuff we're not using, and this is a fantastic way to learn, especially when you're learning Azure. You can create virtual networks, you can create VMs, you can create network security groups, you can create users in Active Directory, and you can delete them as you go along so that you get that real world hands-on experience. And as you can see, it's not that hard to create a data disk. So again, we'll just wait for a minute or two while that deletes, and then we'll do a refresh, and then we'll do a wrap up on the lab. And as you can see, that didn't take too long. Our resource was deleted, so I'm going to dismiss all those notifications. I'm going to close this down and just hit a refresh. And as you can see, my resource group that we had has disappeared. You now have cleaned up behind yourself, and you can now go ahead and do another lab without incurring extra costs. Again, I'd like to thank you so much for subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for following me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your network. I hope you guys have fun, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.